welcome to the Gentleman's Jury. I'm your host, Robbie, and today we're going to be talking about family lineages and trees. And the reason that we'll be talking about this is because a friend of mine and I had a discussion about their use. And interestingly, we had come up with this idea that if we, as modern day Americans, and anyone else who might happen upon this, if you develop a family tree, you can kind of show the passage of time to your grandkids and allow them to see, what great people may have come from your family. Republics tend not to do this, but we're going to talk about some historical context on why certain monarchs, certain leaders had. And we're going to start with the Persian dynasties, as they're some of the easiest to follow. And the Persian dynasties were split up into three main dynasties that controlled ancient Persia. And that's the area where modern Iran is today. Those were the Achaemenid, I apologize, the Achaemenid, I'm going to butcher this, I'm sorry. The Achaemenids, the Parthians, and the Sassanids. And they maintained their dynasties over the years in their capitals of Babylon and Persepolis. And some people that may have come from this that you've heard of would have been Cyrus the Great, Xerxes the First, who conquered most of northern and central Greece. That's the man who would lead the Persian Empire against the Spartans and Athenians during the Persian War, which most people would be familiar with. And they ruled until the period when Hellenistic Macedon and Greece had taken over. And that was when Alexander the Great had come in. He had kicked their butts and removed their last real dynastic leader, Darius the First. Now, the Alexander the Great obviously came from another dynasty, the Argead dynasty, which had Philip II, his father before him, Alexander the Great, and then after Alexander's death, Alexander the Fourth would have taken over, and his dynasty would have kind of split, or he would have allowed some of his more popular generals to split when he died, like Ptolemy, who would have led the Ptolemaic dynasty in Egypt. And what's interesting about many of these leaders is that most of the time you would follow their lineage, they would try and attach it to like a god, right? They'd want that divine sense of this is why I rule, which we carry on later on when we get to more monarchs and their divine sense of rule and divine rule in general. But Alexander split, and Persia actually went to the Seleucids, and there for a long time you had the Seleucid Empire until Rome came and crushed them. And then getting into Rome, you can follow actually the Julio-Claudian family tree, which is the emperors from Augustus to Commodus. And Augustus obviously being the nephew of Julius Caesar, Caesar's family tree had been, I believe they attempted it to link it to Venus or Jupiter, I forget which. But from the Augustus to Commodus, you can see it was Augustus from 63 BC to 27 BC, and everyone would have wanted to be like him. The Tiberius from 42 BC to 14, or from 14 to 37 AD is when Tiberius had ruled, and then you would follow that over to Nero and Claudius to Caligula. You had Vespasian, Vitellius, Domitian, Galbala, and I'm sure you guys haven't really heard of that many of these emperors because, like most things, including presidents, not everyone is an Augustus, not everyone's Tiberius, and not everyone is Nero, right? Some of these people were nothing emperors. They just lived in, managed to not have the empire fall apart under them. And then eventually, after Commodus's death, you get to follow the emperors from the Pertinax, which is like Severan dynasty, and that was like Pertinax, Didius Julianus, people you probably haven't heard of. In fact, I doubt any of you have heard of these people. Septus Severus, and then that would lead into the crisis of the 3rd century, where they would try and link their families again, and you get like people like Decius, who had Hostilian and Hieronymus Etruscus. And then you had people who didn't come from family trees, like Aurelian, who stands out because he helped kind of mitigate the 3rd crisis until he was assassinated. And then you get into the really interesting split, where Rome split between East and West. And that's where you can follow Diocletian into Maximum and Galerius, and that kind of continues until you get Constantine I, who built I believe he was the one that built the Hagia Sophia. And then you can follow that all the way up until the very last true Roman emperor, which I believe was Glycerius. And then you get into the more Byzantine monarchs, Constantine I, Theodosian, Basilicus, who, and then Justin I, and Theodore. And it's actually Justinian I that built the Hagia Sophia, so that is my bad. And a lot of these people would try and, this is kind of when the Christianity, especially around Justinian I, really took hold. So they would stop trying to attach their name to a god and kind of go, no, we see God shows us. We have divine right. And that leads us to kind of the medieval ages where houses were formed. And one of the most famous houses is the House of Habsburg. And if you didn't know, the House of Habsburg is the Austrian house that was around until 1918. I mean, imagine that. That's a little over 100 years ago. It's 104 years ago. They ruled until 1918. And that's where you get like Otto II and the throne of the Holy Roman Empire. And I mean, the Holy Roman Empire obviously collapsed in 1806, but the Habsburg house didn't. Austria just kind of split, and they even the House of Habsburg, I mean, it still exists and owns the Austrian branch of the Order of the Golden Fleece and the Imperial Royal Order of St. George. And it is still going on today. You can still trace their lineage to Karl von Habsburg, who's the head of the family today. And so you get to trace this lineage. And part of the reason why that we were talking about it, it's kind of important, right, is you can follow, you have, so imagine for a second, right? I know people who say they were, descendants from a president or, this famous leader, or, oh, we're part of some, we were Vikings and, but imagine if you were able to trace your lineage back, find out what Viking specifically, right? And maybe it turned out that you were a long descendant of one of the sons of Ragnar, right? As unlikely as many of you would, many of you would likely not be the son of, or a descendant of Ragnar. But I mean, imagine that, right? Or maybe you trace your lineage back and you find out you're a descendant of Julius Caesar, or that you're a descendant of Alexander the Great. Although that I don't believe that's possible. He didn't have kids. But you know what I mean? If you can trace your family lineage back and display that to your children. They can look up and go, "Oh, my descendant was George Washington. He founded this great country." And then you go, "How can I be like that?" And now it gives your children and you a very, wow, I can't, like, a lot of my family might have come from nothing, but there's things that my family may have accomplished that are important, and now your kids go, man, I could be like that. What if I could be like that? And as we kind of got off topic there a little bit, another house that many people don't like, everyone knows that the British still have a monarch, and that's the House of Windsor. And I mean, Britain has been around for a long time, and I mean, they went through several houses, like the House of Tudor, and now they have the House of Windsor, and there was the whole War of the Roses between a whole bunch of other houses vying for power, but all those houses had family members that could be traced. So why do we stop? And that's the interesting question, right? Why did we stop uh, caring? And I believe it's because we became a republic, and like many countries that become republics, every person that comes from your house, right, could be anything. And you weren't just, it wasn't like these monarchs and other people where you're born into royalty. So knowing where you came from gives you a clear line of succession and things like that, right? Because everyone has these rights and things that we get, and we no longer need to worry about, oh, well, if I die, will all my stuff actually go to my eldest heir, or you know anything like that. And I was thinking about it, and while we don't need houses anymore, you know they're not, they're out of date. I mean, you could make from what I understand, you can make a custom coat of arms or anything like that if you're really into it. um but why not trace your family lineage? Why not have your family trace your lineage? Yeah, exactly. You can't think of a really good reason. And that's the crazy part. And my friend and I, we were talking about it, and I thought, what if you, the viewer, you the listener right now, right? You build yourself a minor little board, right? And you put you and your spouse at the top of it, and then your children. You make little branches for your children, right? And say by some act of will or determination or an act of God, right? You become president, or you become as big as Jeff Bezos or something, right? Why not put your name embroidered around in like gold to signify that you've done something great? And now your kids go, well, I want that. I want that for my name. And it pushes them to go and try and be, great. And not all your kids will. I can think right now of one sister right now of mine who would never in a million years amount to much because she chose drugs and other things over life. And that's, we will have a discussion about drugs and the related uses, or and the related issues that come up with those, and the war on drugs and all that. But I wanted to keep this episode lighthearted. Um, but why not? I mean, sit there and ask yourself, what's stopping me from trying to push my kids with this little idea, right? I mean, we've seen one of the most popular movies to come out in the last 20 years, Harry Potter. And one thing that always stuck out to me is when Gary Oldman, who's playing Sirius Black, takes Daniel Radcliffe, who's playing Harry Potter, into the Black home, And he walks him into this room, and it's this family tree. And because he decided not to live up to his family's morals, which was to, be a pure blood, and I mean, there's a whole other reason for it, but he had his name blacked out for not living up to his family morals, right? And that sat with me, and it was a powerful moment. What if I don't live up to my family morals and they have to think of me that way? What if my cousins think of it that way? It encourages a sense of unity as well as develop a very rigid form of, this is what your family might expect of you. And now you're saying what many people consider a quiet part of life out loud. It's just so simple, but so unique of an idea that some people will look at it and go, well, why would you want to do that? And I just keep coming, and I know I keep asking the same question, why don't you? But seriously, think about it. I mean, just take 10 minutes of your day, right? Sit there and think, if I did this, how might my family respond? I know how my family would respond. I'm already working on it. As soon as I put it up, boom. Now, when my kids are older and they look up, they can go, wow, yeah, that is something I kind of want to try to be. That's something I want to strive for. That's something I want to, be a part of. And then we're going to take a little segue here and talk about something else since we're on the discussion of morals and family morals, right? And that discussion goes into what is your house laws, right? You as a parent, you as an adult, you're in your house. What do you set as your rigid guideline? How strenuous do you set it? My wife and I were talking about this general idea, right? We were going through a college class, which, believe it or not, has been pushing very liberal beliefs on us, right? They try, what do you do if a friend, your child's friend comes out as transgender? How do you handle that? And all this other stuff that you're like, I'm trying to learn developmental psychology, and I don't think that how how I want. I don't know. Anyway, the question itself was kind of outrageous, but back onto track. One of the questions it asked, right, that always seemed really absurd to me because they limit your answers, and I think that's the hardest part about this, right? Is they limit your answers. Is my son, the 8-year-old, your virtual 8-year-old son, right? He goes to a friend's house, and they watch an R-rated movie that has a little bit of sexual themes or something, right? It could be like a horror movie or something. And it's like, how do you respond? And it, tries to push you to be like, oh, you should cut friendships with this person. You shouldn't let your son be friends with a family that's so liberal about it. Lets their kids watch an R-rated movie, and I'm like, shit. I watched R-rated movies when I was freaking. I think my dad had me watch it when I was 2 years old, and I wouldn't take a bath ever again. I mean, I take baths now, obviously, but like for like a year, I was scared to get into the tub. And then he showed you the how they made it and everything, and that cleared up. But I'm sitting there and I'm going, well, my ideals don't fit with that, and it got me thinking, what are my house ideals? What ideals do I want to press on my son? That he wants to. That I want my eldest son to live up to. He's 2, by the way. He's obviously not he's not cognitively thinking about my morals and ideas. But if I really wanted my son to turn out the way that I want him to, what should you set as your house rules, right? What are the things that are most important to you? What's the most important thing for you as a parent? And I was thinking about it. And the first thing that comes to mind, right, is I want my son to be independent. I want my son to be determined. I want my son to do, and you go, well, how do you structure your house rules around that? And I know this feels like a tangent, but I'm coming around to something, right? And I thought, well, why don't you write out the rules? And as you start thinking about, how I'd write out those rules, it'd be like, obviously never be something cheesy like don't give up on your dreams or anything, but it's like don't quit unless, keep your, don't quit, always see something through, try your best, maintain individuality, and those are obviously aren't the house rules themselves. Those are unrefined thoughts on it. But I was thinking, what else these houses, when they trace their lineage, have house words, couple things to just keep your, just a couple words, and that's supposed to represent kind of what your what your family might be about. And I thought about our military uses this, right? I served for basically 3 years, right? And I was part of an engineer unit. And interestingly enough, right, the engineer unit I had served with had a motto, and they ask you to you know keep that motto in mind, and every now and then, um, they'd always, they're like, they never asked you for the motto, but they wanted you to know it. So like you went up to say the board for promotion or something. The question you might get is, "What's the First Engineer Battalion motto?" And the motto is always first, right? Because as an engineer battalion, you have to clear the way. So they made their motto always first, so that way you knew that you were the one that was first up. You were going to clear the way for people. And then the companies had mottos, and for HHC, which is what I was a part of, they used to call themselves, the nickname they gave themselves was Die Hard, because they wanted you to think, well, you don't want you don't want to go up there and die easy, so die hard. And I mean, people used to joke about life expectancies and things like that, but and we're not going to get into that, but think about that, right? I mean, our unit had a motto, and that's what they wanted you to live up to. And I think that the always first might have been the the first infantry brigade's motto to begin with, the Big Red One's motto. But and anyway, I'm getting sidetracked a bit. But the point is, right? Why not have a couple small house words that signify your motto, right? I mean, the Habsburgs had it, and so did I imagine so does the royal family now, and and their motto is AEIOU and Verbis Unitas. And the AEIOU was a symbolic device coined by Frederick III, who was around in the early to late 1400s. And it means all the world is subject to Austria, which is what they believed in, right? And Verbis Unitas means with united forces, and that might refer to yeah. I don't know what that one actually refers to, but that was something that was the other thing. and the more I think about it, the more I go, obviously these this family tree and these house mottos and everything might sound very, dynastic, but I mean that's what your family is, right? You trace your family lineage. That's your dynasty. That's what you came from, and that's what will come from you. And I mean, if you keep a family tree, it makes it really easy to follow who you were, who you're from, and it sure as heck makes it easier to follow who might health condition. I mean, there's other practical uses to this too, right? Does your family have a history of health problems, right? My younger sister has a heart condition that we don't know where she got it from. My mom thinks it was from her side. She's adopted, so you never know. And my dad doesn't talk about his biological father, and for whatever that give and take with that. I'm not gonna get into, but I know, starting from me and my wife, if I built a family tree, right? My wife has health conditions. I don't, but I come from a family that might have some. So if I follow my tree up, I can go, well, yeah, we do have a history, and it makes it so much easier for when your kids are older and they go, I don't understand why my kids have this health condition, or I don't understand. And obviously, health conditions aren't always hereditary, but it really helps with the ones that are. Not to mention it just helps in general to know where your family came from, right? As Americans, we're all this mixing pool of different ethnicities and cultures, and I mean, everyone here is in some form or another from a descendant from an immigrant. I believe even most Native Americans at this point may have if they follow their lineage up, they might find someone who had moved here from, you know, Spain or Mexico or you know anywhere. And it's crazy that we don't do this anymore. Getting kind of back onto on track a little bit though. You know, one thing I want to ask you is, how long would it take you, hypothetically, right? How long would it take you to get a little paint and a board, right? And write your name out, and write your wife's name out, or your husband, you know, and draw a little line down to your sons and write their names. Give it enough room, right? Because obviously they're probably gonna marry. I mean, if they marry twice, you're just gonna have to repaint it anyway. And I mean, after a while, you might need a whole room eventually, right? I mean, that's the goal, though, is to be able to trace yourself from you to your great 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 grandchild, and show this long list of people. It shows your family, and I mean, I encourage everyone to do this. I mean, I'm doing it now. And my friend, he plans on doing it too, because he knows that it will be, even if you don't use it for the practical reasons, even if you don't, try and use it to inspire kids, it's just something to show the passage of time for your family, to show your family's history. I mean, imagine if in 500 years, right? Your family's been doing this for 500 years, and they have a whole like RV garage fully painted, right? With your family's lineage. That'd be impressive. They would walk in there and they'd go, wow, I know exactly where I came from. And it shows a pride. It gives you pride in where you came from. And not everyone wants that, right? Some of you might be like, well, my mom's not a very good person, or my dad's never been around, or things like that. But it shows your kids that, they had pride in you, I'm sure. I doubt you turned out to be the parent that your parents were. I mean, maybe you did, but, you know, they can go and go, wow, wow. I mean, imagine, right, that you're president now, and your kid 500 or descendant 500 years later traces them to you, and it inspires him to try and do that, try and lead a country. And it could be that you were a really good president. I mean, given our current political climate, that wouldn't be hard. I mean, it's going to be pretty hard here pretty soon, but beside the point, they can look at that and go, wow, we came from something. We were from somewhere. Maybe you come from a family, and maybe it shows that you're from a family of servicemen, right? I used to walk into my great grandmother's house, and on the wall, she had a she had five, no, sorry, six pictures. Six when I finally was at it, right? And the first one was my I think it was my great uncle who served on the Arizona right when it went down. And then it had a picture of a couple of my uncles or my great uncles, and then it had a picture of I believe my godfather, right? And then it had a picture of me. And they were in the Navy. Some of them were in the Air Force. My great grandfather was in the Army, right? His photo was up there, and I was in the Army. And I went, wow, I'm from a family of servicemen. Multiple members of my family stood up and decided to serve our country, right? And that gave me pride. I don't feel like you don't always feel like you live up to, that level, but that still gave me pride to know that I came from that. And I think it gives my dad pride that he knows that his son stepped up and did something he chose not to. I mean, he did. That's complicated, but I stepped up and did it, right? And I'm the only male in my generation for my family. I come from a generation of, I think I have three sisters and three female cousins, and I'm the only male. So there's a lot of expectations that weigh on me. And to know that I stepped up to what my family probably expected of me because I got to see this passage of time. And I think that's what this really comes down to, right? And it comes down to kind of three things, right? The inspiration you might give to a younger generation, the setting of expectations for what you want your family to be, and showing the history through the passage of time of your family, right? It's just something to think about. I mean, not everyone's going to do this. In fact, I doubt half of you will probably even bother trying. But I know that some of you might. Some of you might think it's a good idea. Some of you go, oh, posh. But I mean, historically, they did it, right? And I'm sure it inspired some leaders from the Holy Roman Empire, from the Habsburgs, right? I'm sure it inspired some members of Julius Caesar's family and Augustus, the Julio-Claudian dynasty. Another dynasty that I didn't get to cover was the Hanno dynasty from Hanno the Great. I believe Hannibal came from the Barca dynasty, or either the Maganoid dynasty or the Barca dynasty. Anyway, he probably looked up to somebody. I mean, the Ptolemy dynasty lasted from Alexander to Julius Caesar. they get to show the passage of time, and you get to see that. And I think that's something you should really think about. I guess that's just food for thought. I thank you for listening. I'm going to apologize for our long hiatus. School has been kind of long and tedious, and work and the holidays rolled around, and where I'm now establishing more of a firm solution to that. We're getting a back catalog built up and things like that. So I apologize for the hiatus that I had taken. Some of you might be, have been chomping at the bit to hear this next episode or something, but anyway, I thank you guys for listening. And please be sure to check out our YouTube page. It's the Gentleman's Jury on YouTube. For some I shouldn't say exclusive. It's just there's a couple of discussions I did with a couple of my friends on some topics that some people on Spotify wouldn't have gotten, because for a while there it wouldn't let me upload onto Spotify. So please be sure to check that out and recommend this. If you like what we do, please recommend it to a friend. I mean, that's how it helps me grow, and it shows me that people are actually interested in some of the stuff I'm talking about. So thank you, and you guys have a good one.